and they have been wreaking havoc all across Europe, blowing things up, conducting intimidation operations, assassinating people, trying to assassinate people.
As we've been reporting, Russia's defence attache is being expelled from the UK. It was announced by the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, this afternoon.
We will expel the Russian defence attache, who is an undeclared military intelligence officer. We will remove diplomatic premises status from several Russian-owned properties in the UK, including Seacock's House, a Russian-owned property in Sussex, and the trade and defence section in Highgate, which we believe have been used for intelligence purposes. And we are imposing new restrictions on Russian diplomatic visas, including capping the length of time Russian diplomats can spend in the UK.
That's James Cleverly there. Let's talk to Edward Lucas, the Times columnist and security specialist. Hello to you, Edward.
Hello, John.
Edward, can you throw any more light on what the Russian attaché had been up to? I mean, military attachés over the years have been commonly associated with the intelligence agencies back home, haven't they?
Yes, military attachés are licensed spies. Their job is to be a conduit of information between their military and the host country's military. And so I think it's slightly odd to say that he's an undeclared intelligence officer, but that's really a detail. The point is that our government belatedly is very fed up with the antics of the Russian military intelligence, the GRU, which is not just an intelligence service, it's also closer to our sort of SAS. It has a big special forces element, and they have been wreaking havoc all across Europe, blowing things up, conducting intimidation operations, assassinating people, trying to assassinate people. And we've had a big warning from spy chiefs this week that this effort is intensifying. The targets are getting more sensitive, the means are getting more ruthless, the intensity is the frequency is increasing, and our government is trying to call a halt to it. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that they'll be trembling in the Kremlin as a result.
Yeah, I mean, the talk, though, of taking away diplomatic status from other Russian-owned sites, that does look like a bit more of an escalation than you might normally see.
Well, you might ask why Russia has a country palace I think it's in Sussex with diplomatic immunity. And that Russian trade mission up in Highgate is a nest of spies worthy of a John le Carré book. And it's used for all sorts of electronic intelligence collection and other things. So I think it's high time that we close this down, and we should have done it long ago. The big question for me is, how will the Russians react? It's easy for them to expel the British defense attaché in Moscow, but we don't have a British embassy palace in the Russian countryside. There was a dacha to which I bequeathed my children's climbing frame when I left Moscow, but that's long since been got rid of. There isn't a British embassy dacha anymore, so I don't know quite what the Russians will do if they want to adopt a strict tit-for-tat policy.
Yeah, I mean, more generally, Britain, the UK, is a country that Russia seems to love to hate.
Yes, I mean, we occupy a kind of demonic phantasm in the Russian psyche, and it goes back to the 19th century when they thought that the British Empire was trying to stop them playing their side of the great game, and we were sending our spies and political officers to places in Central Asia, and it carried on really with our attempts to throttle the Russian Revolution, which was, I think, an admirable idea, but very badly executed. And then, of course, the ideological conflict of the Cold War. So if you say in Russian, Mi-6, which is MI6, every Russian knows exactly what you mean and assumes that it's an immensely powerful and influential bureaucracy, which doesn't just threaten Russia, but also runs Britain.
Edward, great to talk to you as always. Thank you. Edward Lucas there.
There is a much broader pattern of Russian malign activity across Europe. These include plans for sabotage activities against military aid for Ukraine, in Germany and in Poland, espionage in Bulgaria and in Italy, cyber attacks and disinformation activities, airspace violations and GPS jamming with an impact on civil aviation. Over a number of years, we have witnessed Russia and its intelligence services engage in yet more open and more brazen attempts to undermine our security, harm our people, and interfere in our democracies. Litvinenko, Georgia, Crimea, Salisbury, Ukraine, and across Europe. And since the illegal invasion of Ukraine, the rhetoric, the threats, the accusations from Russia have only increased, as Putin seeks to justify the death and destruction that he has brought to the Ukrainian people.
Right. Well, Kate, I mean, what do you think of this? I mean, the temperature between Britain and Russia, it's pretty chilly. Just seems to have dipped another degree, if that was possible.
Yeah, I do think this is actually quite significant. The fact that the UK has decided to expel this defense attaché tells you that, Russia clearly at some point has crossed a line. This will not have been a decision that was taken lightly. There were kind of a move from the Russian side, to expel or to make things more difficult for the UK a couple of months ago. I think this should be seen in that light. But remember the role of this defense attaché. I mean, there's a general acceptance that they probably will be gathering intelligence while they are here in the UK, but the government would put up with that in order to have this dialogue, this open dialogue, which in theory is supposed to avoid any needless escalation or misunderstanding. Now, to remove that person is to say, well, we're not going to use that channel anymore. And it does up the ante. And I think actually what you're hearing from the government is a tougher message here on Russia, that there are many MPs, many around the country, who've been calling for the government to get tough on China, who are not satisfied with the way that UK ministers have dealt with some of those data breaches, those attacks by China in recent weeks. I think what we're seeing now on Russia, certainly, and I wonder whether we might get more to come, even in rhetoric terms on China too, is a recognition that we can't let this stand. We have to do something, even if it does up the ante, up the stakes. And in a way, it's sort of taking that, not the fight's the wrong word, but it's taking that to Russia and saying, okay, enough. And similar with China too. David Cameron is making a big speech tomorrow. We don't yet know what's in it, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see some more of this type of language and a little bit more from the UK government in terms of we are going to sort of stand our ground here.
Yeah, there is a well-thumbed playbook for these things. We expel one of theirs, they expel one of ours. But how might this now escalate? Let's talk again a little bit later on, Kate. Thank you.